Welcome to a new Daily Top Askreddit video. Today's topic. Single ladies of Reddit, why do you think the Union failed in the Battle of Fredericksburg in December of 1862 during Ambrose Burnside's invasion into Confederate-held Virginia? This question is just cruel. I know perfectly well I'm single because I don't know enough about the Battle of Fredericksburg. You don't need to rub it in. Everyone point and laugh at you /collective_noun for not knowing enough about late 1862 failed Union invasions into Virginia. Stonewalled. Lol. I've read that the defeat is generally, no pun intended, chalked up to Burnside's indecision and miscommunication concerning the ferocity of the attack. Edit, I better get a husband out of this. Edit 2, I had 18 Reddit karma before today and 0 men interested in dating me. This has been quite a reversal of fortune. Edit 3, if I get a husband out of this you guys are all invited to the wedding in Fredericksburg. That's what my wife says my problem is during fights also. That's what mine says is the problem in bed. This question haunts me because I can't seem to muster any interest in military history and I know that's why I'm still single. Women my age are supposed to be obsessed with General Sherman or taking quizzes to tell which side of the Mason-Dixon line they are on or reading Ambrose Bierce. I'm just not that emotionally mature yet. The ladies loved Sherman. That's why it was called Sherman's March to the Sea. No one could start a fire in a girl's panties like General Sherman. If I'm not mistaken the Confederacy had higher ground, and after previously failing to invade some of the North they gained equipment. And they had more men. Burnside also chose, for whatever reason, not to attack the center, which was a fatal error. Marye's Heights was an agonizingly drawn-out series of head-on attacks directly at the dug-in center of Lee's line. What Burnside failed to exploit was Meade's attack on the left, which actually penetrated the Confederates' right but stalled for lack of support. Damn it. A question I had a killer answer for and I'm married. But do you have a single sister or friend to give the answer to? I do. But then I'd have to admit I read it, and the hunt would be on for her to find my account. Lol. They didn't believe in themselves enough. The real Civil War was the friends they met along the way. If you were trying to make a really obscure question popular on this sub, well, then I think you have succeeded. 2 things. Nice. You single and want to mingle. Ah, so it was all a ruse to find single women. Fair play good sir / madam. If you'd asked this question 8 years ago, I would have proposed to you on the spot. I confuse some of the area's battles, but wasn't it because Burnside waited so long for his pontoon bridges that the two armies basically sat and stared at each other across the Rappahannock for weeks? Like so close that they played card games together and exchanged cigarettes and food. Then when the pontoons finally did arrive, they took forever to build and the Confederates just basically sat there and waited for them to get halfway across the 50 River and were like, not today fam. Also, I'm not kidding about my first line. Who else owns this book? https://c2eova5.jpg and was one of the only women and the only under -30 person on the walking reenactment of the battle from the Irish Brigade's route. I don't but I've seen it. I'm not hitting on you, after a lifetime, I'm old, of observing naval history, I don't know much about my own damned country's civil war. Your comment has gone unnoticed for too long and only 31 upvotes. Ash. The vagaries of Reddit. Single ladies with an interest in military history are more rare than single male military history buffs with good looks and charisma. Us old history uggos don't stand a chance. Username checks out. I'm a single Australian lady and have limited knowledge of American war history, but if I were to guess I'd say it was because Virginia was full of virgins and therefore had more trebuchets. That is correct. Lee and the army occupied strategic ground. The Union Army needed to use assault boats and build a pontoon bridge. The heights behind Fredericksburg were entrenched with Lee's army, and frontal assaults couldn't dislodge them. Happy Cake Day. Also, just learned that clicking the Say Happy Cake Day link sends a chat message. Self-cringe. Just because I'm married doesn't mean I don't have an opinion on this highly relevant and pressing subject. This is discrimination and I will not stand for it. As a single man without a history degree, but with access to Google and Wikipedia, I feel I should be able to voice my uninformed opinion about any topic on Reddit as well. r/u popular IO is already a whole sub just for that. Full frontal infantry attacks on entrenched defenders. Burnside was using 18th century tactics in what was the predecessor of 20th century warfare. Didn't they keep using those tactics up to WW1 though? Yup. But Americans learned while Europeans stuck to obsolete doctrine. See, the Battle of Belleau Wood. Yep. Grant kind of learned after Cold Harbor, but still had no choice but to attack entrenched defenders. To his credit, he tried blowing up the defenders with a mine shaft, but the resulting Battle of the Crater was still a disaster. I'm just a wet, horny slut who's desperate for cock after months in quarantine, but I always thought one factor that should have been given more weight was an outbreak of typhus in nearby Falmouth, where most of Burnside's supplies were concentrated. One recurring theme of military history is that great catastrophes tend to have their roots in mundane misfortunes. Much is made of Burnside's decision to wait for pontoon bridges, but arguably a worse effect of the delay was to weaken Sumner's forces even as they sat idle in Falmouth. By the time the critical bridges arrived, the battle was half lost, and Sumner's forces, numerically superior at first, could only put up a token fight, barely more than I would if some stud were to walk in here and ravish me where I sit. This is not to disregard the other factors that are well established in the historiography, of course. Did I mention I'm bi-curious? Maybe you have a friend you could bring along on our date. But the outbreak of camp fever in Falmouth surely deserves some consideration. Mama warned me about you. 3. Can't really know for sure, but I suspect the Union soldiers were making the rookie mistake of wearing stilettos when clearly half heels were more practical in that muddy field. Silly bitches. You binging Drag Race, 2. D. Sherman asked himself, what are wedges? Male here. I'm so sick of never hearing a man's perspective on this topic. It's quite obvious they lacked the true meaning of friendship. I mean, yes, there were other factors at play, but this was the one thing they could have rectified and turned the situation around. And how many times is this mentioned in this post? 0. Can you believe that? Freaky 0. This is exactly why I'm happily married. Fun fact, Ambrose Burnside was known to sport some pretty impressive whiskers along the sides of his face and actually popularized the term sideburns. So single ladies of Reddit, he was probably available at the time. Also it was probably because of this. Unfortunately for Burnside, the section of the Rappahannock near Falmouth was too deep to ford, so he was forced to wait for pontoon bridges to arrive in order to cross the river. Due to a miscommunication between Burnside and Henry Halleck, General-in-Chief of all Union armies, the pontoons were delayed in arriving, and James Longstreet's Confederate Corps had ample time to occupy a strong position on Murray's Heights in Fredericksburg. On December the 11th, as Burnside crossed the Rappahannock with more than 120,000 Union troops, Lee offered only a token resistance in order to give Stonewall Jackson's corps time to connect with Longstreet's, stretching out the Confederate line by some 3 miles. I saw an article many years ago, 1990s. In print media called Was the Civil War Won by a Whisker? In it the author opined that the most successful generals had full beards, and that obviously Burnside's epic set of mutton chops were not sufficient to secure him military victory and the resulting glory. And yes, his facial hair was called Burnsides and later sideburns. I can't find the original article I recall, but here's an example from 2003 https www.dailypress.com/news. Well. I am a single lady of Reddit, but I realized I know nothing about this battle. Sighs while thinking this is probably why I'm single. If I had a gold to give, I'd give it for this question. Bravo op. Edit, my first gold, D. Thank you. Thank you. You're too kind. It's a truly wonderful form of misdirection. Listen buddy, my APUSH test was yesterday. I am no longer legally required to remember anything. I graduated 3 years ago and the word APUSH gave me flashbacks. They didn't have the higher ground obviously. You underestimate their power. I mean, the Union did always have the moral high ground, and I'm pretty sure that's why they won the war. Bitch did not have enough uniqueness, nerve, charisma or talent. You know it goes charisma, uniqueness, nerve and talent. You're missing the pun, queen. Sachets away. Damn, you /Zach's pocket change. You're smooth AF. Not sure why it's specifically single women, could you explain? Op is trying to find a GF that is interested in war history, so he can hit on them. It's a joke about how many questions on this sub start that way, following something like what do boobies feel like. So this was a pleasant subversion of expectation. Obligatory, not a single lady, but I know a couple single ladies. Too bad that I never got their phone numbers to give you their answer. I'll ask, I'm sure they're in my area. Oh shit, I live in Fredericksburg. Virginia itself was a strong Confederate state, and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson were both from VA, so Virginia's prominence during the war definitely helped the Confederacy for this battle. But 4 large-ass Civil War battles occurred near Fredericksburg, Chuckalesville, Wilderness, and Spotsylvania Courthouse, mainly because Fredericksburg is basically right in between the 2 capitals of DC and Richmond during the war. Edit, love the replies and seeing fellow Fredericksburgers here. Join us at /r/Fredericksburg. If you drink downtown, we've probably met. I turned 21 right before the pandemic started. Spotsylvia's one claim to fame, one of the bloodiest battles of the Civil War, and everyone claimed victory and nobody won. I grew up a few miles from the Spotsylvania battlefield, it's where my dad taught me to drive. Haven't been back in a long time. This thread is weirding me out. But also, I've lived in most corners of the USA at this point, and whenever I say I'm from Spotsylvania there's only 2 responses, 1. Blank stare, or 2. Oh, Civil War trivia.